They threw me out years ago, but now they want the home I built myself. It still feels strange to say that sentence out loud, like it belongs to someone else's life, a line from a courtroom drama instead of my own. But every word of it is true. I remember the exact night they told me to pack up and leave. My father's voice, cold as the tile beneath my knees, said, "If you can't live by our rules, you can't live in this house." I walked out with a suitcase full of clothes and a heart full of silence. I was 19, terrified, and completely alone. Years later, the irony drips like poison in a cup. After clawing my way into stability, after saving every paycheck, living in tiny rented rooms, and finally signing that deed with my name and no one else's, they suddenly remembered I existed. Not to apologize, not to ask how I've been, but to claim my home as family property, as if my sweat and sacrifices were just a temporary loan to be reclaimed when convenient. I learned something about people like that. Entitlement doesn't vanish with distance, it hibernates. It waits until you've built something real, until you're finally safe, and then it knocks on your door pretending to be kinship. My doorbell rang 2 weeks ago. I almost didn't answer, but habit made me check the security cam first, and there they were. My parents. My brother, arms folded, eyes scanning the porch like a man surveying his inheritance. I didn't open the door, not right away. I stood there, watching them through the small screen, feeling my stomach twist. They smiled like nothing had happened. I knew better. That kind of smile hides paperwork, pressure, and manipulation. I waited until they left, then found an envelope they'd slipped into the mailbox. Inside was a letter written in my father's careful block letters. "We think it's only right that your brother take over the family home now that he's starting his own family. It's time to bring things back together." I laughed, quiet, bitter, disbelieving. They called my house the family home. The same family that locked me out of their own years ago. The letter smelled faintly of cologne and arrogance. Beneath it was a photocopy of the original property deed, only someone had crossed out my signature and written my brother's name above it in pen. No shame, no explanation, just assumption. That night I sat at my dining table and stared at the real deed, the official one I'd kept in a sealed envelope since the day I closed on the house. My name gleamed in the center, bold and permanent. I ran my finger over the embossed seal, grounding myself. Proof, my quiet weapon. It's strange how calm truth feels when you've spent years being told your reality doesn't matter. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I just whispered to the empty kitchen, "Not this time." I took out my phone and scrolled back through years of old texts, the ones where they told me I'd never make it without them, the ones where my mother said, "Family always owns what it builds." I flagged them all. My version of receipts. I knew I'd need them. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that when someone feels entitled to your life, logic won't save you, documentation will. I didn't know how far this would go yet. I didn't know that they'd try to use a lawyer or that they'd whisper to relatives that I'd stolen something. But in that moment, with my fingers on that deed and the street outside quiet under the rain, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day I was kicked out. Control. They could have called to talk, they could have apologized, but they chose paperwork over peace. So I chose proof over pleading. The kind of justice that doesn't shout, just waits with a calm smile and an envelope. When I think back to the house I grew up in, I can still smell the faint mix of bleach, fried onions, and my mother's perfume. It was never a home built on warmth. It was a place built on hierarchy. My father at the top, my brother right beneath him, and me somewhere under the floorboards. I was the difficult one, the child who asked why, who didn't nod fast enough, who didn't laugh when told to. From as early as I can remember, my brother was the sun and I was the shadow. When he crashed the family car, my parents said, "It was just a mistake." When I forgot to answer a call while studying, they said, "You're ungrateful and selfish." It wasn't about fairness. It was about control, about the way power feels when it's used like a leash. I used to tell myself it wasn't that bad, that they just didn't know how to love properly. But love that needs your silence to exist isn't love, it's management. And when I stopped being manageable, they stopped pretending to love me. The night they kicked me out wasn't some dramatic storm of shouting and doors slamming. It was quiet, methodical, like they'd rehearsed it. My father stood by the doorway while my mother folded my clothes into a trash bag. No tears, no emotion, just resignation. "You'll thank us one day when you learn respect," she said. I didn't thank them. I just walked into the cold and didn't look back. For years, I lived like a ghost, couch to couch, room to room. I worked any job that would have me waitressing, cleaning offices at night, tutoring on weekends. Every paycheck was a tiny victory. Every bill paid was proof that I existed outside of their permission. I still remember the first time I saw the house I would eventually buy. It was small, a little crooked, but it had a porch that caught the morning light just right. I could almost see myself there, coffee mug in hand, peace in reach. It was everything their house never was, mine. It took me 4 years to save enough for the down payment. I ate ramen for months, patched my own shoes, skipped social events. But the day I signed the papers, something inside me healed. I wasn't just buying a house, I was buying evidence that they were wrong. I could build stability from nothing. I could build family out of self-respect. I remember standing in the empty living room after the agent left, my voice echoing against bare walls. "You did this," I whispered to myself, not out of pride, but relief. For the first time, my life didn't depend on anyone's mood swings. The first proof of ownership came in the mail 2 weeks later, the mortgage statement with my name printed clean and solid in black ink. I kept that envelope like scripture, because names on paper matter. They tell the world who owns what, who worked for what, who deserves what. It was a small piece of paper that carried the weight of my freedom. My brother called me that same week, acting surprised I could even afford a place. He laughed over the phone, saying, "So you really bought a house by yourself, without help?" His voice carried that tone I knew too well, the one that said I was still a child in their eyes, a fluke of luck, not effort. I didn't answer. I let silence do what words couldn't. Years passed quietly after that. Birthdays went unacknowledged. Holidays came and went without calls, and I was fine with it. Peace is addictive once you've lived in chaos, but peace also makes people curious, especially people who once controlled you. I didn't realize it then, but those years of distance were just the calm before their re-entry. They had never accepted my independence. They'd just been waiting for a reason to reclaim it. And in their minds, property was the perfect excuse. Sometimes, at night, I catch myself remembering that old house, the one I grew up in. I can still hear the echoes of arguments through the thin walls, my father's voice calling for my brother, never for me. It's a strange kind of ache, nostalgia tangled with relief. I don't miss them. I miss the version of myself that still believed family meant safety. Now, as I look back, I realize the pattern was always there. Favoritism disguised as tradition, manipulation dressed as concern. They never expected me to stand on my own, let alone own something they could covet. My existence was meant to be a supporting role in my brother's story, but I rewrote the script, and that's what they can't forgive me for. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. I was halfway through my morning coffee, the world still soft and quiet, when my phone began to buzz across the table. The caller ID flashed, "Mom." For a second, my thumb hovered over the decline button. It had been nearly 3 years since her last call, 3 years of silence that had almost started to feel like peace. But curiosity is a tricky thing. Against my better judgment, I swiped to answer. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, sweet, deliberate, the tone she used when she wanted something. "Sweetheart," she said, like the word hadn't been dormant in her mouth for years. "We've been thinking about you lately." I almost laughed. We, the same we that told me I was on my own. I let her talk. I'd learned long ago that silence was better than defense. She spoke about family, about how much had changed, about how my brother had grown into a responsible man. Then she said it, the line that still makes my stomach turn. "You know, your father and I feel it's only right that the family home stays in the family name. Your brother is getting married soon, and it would mean so much if he could start his life there." I sat there blinking. "The family home," I repeated, almost unsure if I'd heard her right. "You mean my house?" She paused, just for a breath, but it said everything. "Well, technically, it's part of the family's legacy," she said. "You bought it, yes, but it's still ours in spirit." I felt something cold settle in my chest. legacy, spirit, words people use when they want something they didn't earn. "Mom," I said carefully, "I bought this house after you and Dad kicked me out. You didn't pay for a single brick." She sighed like I was being difficult again, like a child refusing to share a toy. "Don't be so possessive. Your brother needs stability. He'll be starting a family and you're just, well, you're alone there. Don't you think he deserves a chance?" It was subtle, almost gentle, but beneath it was that same condescension I'd grown up choking on. I didn't respond. She kept talking, her voice turning syrupy, weaving guilt into every sentence. "You have your own life, darling. Let your brother have his. After all, family should take care of each other." When I finally hung up, my coffee had gone cold. I sat at the table, staring out the window at the small garden I'd built, my sanctuary. The sun was warm against the glass, but I couldn't feel it. I replayed her words in my head like an old tape. "It's still ours in spirit." Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from my father. No greeting, no softness, just a statement. "Your mother tells me you're being unreasonable. We'll sort the house situation through our lawyer. It belongs to the family, not just you." I stared at the text, heart thudding. There it was, the entitlement polished and brazen. Our lawyer. They weren't asking, they were declaring. They'd already decided. A few minutes later, another message came in, this time from my brother. "Don't make this hard. It's not personal. You know, Mom and Dad always wanted me to have the house. We'll help you find somewhere smaller if you can't handle it alone." The arrogance bled through every word. "Help me!" As if my independence were a burden I couldn't carry. I took a screenshot immediately. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd learned that when people like them feel entitled, they'll rewrite the story later. And I wasn't about to lose the truth again. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, my mind spinning between disbelief and resolve. I'd built this life brick by brick, payment by payment. Every wall in this house was proof that I could survive without their approval. And now, they wanted to erase that proof, to turn my victory into their narrative. I opened my laptop around midnight and started scrolling through old files, scanned copies of mortgage documents, inspection forms, insurance renewals. Every line, every signature had my name on it. The more I looked, the calmer I felt. I didn't need to raise my voice, I had receipts. Still, the ache of betrayal was deep. I thought about the years I'd spent wondering if maybe, one day, they'd change, if forgiveness was waiting somewhere on the horizon. But forgiveness doesn't mean surrender, and love doesn't mean giving away what you bled to earn. By morning, my decision was made. No more long calls, no more arguing with people who twisted logic into guilt. The next time they came for what was mine, I wouldn't explain, I would prove. The morning after my father's message, I woke with a headache that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with disbelief. I stared at the screen again, the words, "We'll sort the house situation through our lawyer," glowing like a threat. For a while, I just sat there, phone in hand, half expecting another message, a demand, an insult, something. But nothing came, just silence. And in that silence, I made a decision. If they wanted a fight wrapped in paperwork, I would give them one. But by the book, by the facts, and without a single raised voice. I made a pot of coffee, grabbed my laptop, and opened the folder labeled House on my desktop. Inside were years of digital records, scanned mortgage payments, the purchase agreement, property tax receipts, emails with the real estate agent. At the time, I'd saved them just to feel secure. Now they felt like armor. As I scrolled, I noticed something I'd never paid much attention to before. Every page bore my name. Not theirs, not a cosigner, just mine. I took screenshots of the headers, highlighting the official letterheads and timestamps. Facts had a strange kind of power. They didn't yell, they just were. I texted my friend Claire, a paralegal I'd met through work, and asked if she had time to help me sort things. Within the hour, she was at my kitchen table, her laptop open, eyes sharp and sympathetic. She'd seen things like this before, families trying to claim what didn't belong to them. "You're smart to start gathering," she said, flipping through pages. "If they're talking about lawyers, that means they're already building their story. You need to build yours first." We spent the day creating a timeline, date of purchase, first payment, all major expenses tied to the house. Claire color-coded everything. It felt methodical, almost soothing. For once, I wasn't reacting, I was preparing. Late that afternoon, I found something I'd almost forgotten. The audio files from my old voicemail account, back when I still tried to stay in touch with my parents. One of them, from 2 years ago, was my mother's voice, soft but edged with disdain. "You owe this family more than you think. Don't forget who raised you." I played it twice. Then I saved it to the new folder I'd labeled receipts. Claire looked up. "That's manipulation, clear as day," she said. "Keep it. If they ever accuse you of being hostile or ungrateful, this shows pattern and tone." I nodded. Her calmness steadied me. "I just don't want this to turn ugly." She smiled a little sadly. "It already did. You're just making sure it doesn't get messy." By evening, the table was covered in papers, organized, stapled, labeled. I felt lighter than I had in days. Facts were oxygen. They didn't erase the pain, but they gave it structure. When Claire left, I sat alone with the folder in front of me, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about my family, about how they'd probably be sitting together right now, spinning some story about me, selfish, ungrateful, unfit. And then I thought about my younger self, the one who walked out with a trash bag and no plan, and how proud she would have been to see this version of me, surrounded by proof of her survival. I printed one copy of every key document and slipped them into a manila envelope, labeling it "in case of nonsense." It made me laugh a little. Humor was my last defense. Just before bed, I opened my phone and recorded a video message to myself. "If they ever try to twist this," I said softly, "remember who built this house. Remember whose name is on every line. You don't need their approval to keep what's yours." Then, just as I was about to turn off the lights, I heard another message notification. It was my brother again. "Mom says you're lawyering up. Seriously, you're going to bring strangers into this. We're family." I took a screenshot. Then, for the first time, I smiled, not out of satisfaction, but from the clarity of knowing exactly what to do next. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence was starting to speak for me. The following Monday, I found myself sitting in a small law office that smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. The walls were lined with certificates, frames of authority, and behind the desk sat Ms. Ramirez, a property attorney whose calm presence was almost unsettling. She wasn't warm exactly, but steady, like someone who'd seen every kind of family betrayal imaginable and still believed in paperwork over passion. I laid the folder on her desk like it was an offering. She flipped through each page with a precision that made me both nervous and relieved. "You've kept excellent records," she said after a few minutes, her tone factual, not flattering. "That's rare in cases like this." "Cases like this?" I asked. "Families," she said simply, glancing over her glasses. "It's always the same script, parents or siblings assuming what's yours belongs to everyone. But law doesn't care about family myths. It cares about names on deeds and signatures on documents." For the first time in days, I felt my chest loosen. She spoke the way I'd always wished someone would, without guilt, without the heavy sighs that turned truth into insolence. Ms. Ramirez leaned back and folded her hands. "If they're serious about sorting it through their lawyer, we'll prepare a preemptive response. A notice of title ownership. It's formal and non-confrontational. It simply states that you are the sole owner and any claims against that are legally baseless. No emotion, just fact." The phrase "no emotion," just fact settled in my bones like armor. We spent 2 hours going over every detail, how I'd purchased the house independently, the timeline of payments, the evidence of no shared funds. She drafted the notice right in front of me, her fingers moving fast and sure. At one point, she looked up and asked, "Do you want this sent directly, or do you want to hand it to them yourself?" I hesitated. If I send it, they'll say I'm hiding behind a lawyer. If I hand it to them, they'll twist it into drama. "Then have me deliver it," she said with a faint smile. "Neutral, official, no drama possible." When she printed the document, she read the first line aloud. "This serves as formal confirmation that name. is the sole and rightful owner of the property located at address. Having acquired and maintained ownership without familial contribution or joint interest. Simple, surgical, it was the exact tone I needed. She handed me a copy, stamped and signed. The weight of that paper felt heavier than it should have, like a physical shield. We also drafted an internal memo for my records, a document noting the events to date, the messages I'd received, and the timeline of my responses. "You'll thank yourself later," she said. "Paper trails are better than memories when the story starts to shift." Before I left, I asked her one last question. "Do you think they'll actually try something, like file a claim?" She gave a small shrug. "Maybe, but people like that rarely want the fight. They want the illusion of control. Once they see you're not afraid and that you have counsel, they usually back off. Entitlement thrives on weakness. You're not giving them any." Outside, the air felt clearer. I walked home with the notice in my bag, rehearsing what I'd say if my parents called again. Nothing cruel, nothing heated, just boundaries spoken with calm finality. This is not a discussion. This is a fact. That evening, I called Claire to thank her and told her about the meeting. She laughed softly when I read her the notice's wording. "God, that sounds powerful," she said. "Bet they won't like seeing that seal." "I'm not trying to make them like or dislike anything," I said. "I just want them to stop rewriting the story." Later, I scanned the notice and added it to my digital folder. I named the new file-proof 05 Notice of Title Ownership, PDF. A quiet satisfaction settled over me. I wasn't angry anymore, just precise. Every move would be deliberate, documented, and dignified. But even as I prepared, a part of me couldn't shake the dread of what might come next. My parents never accepted silence as an answer. My brother never accepted no without retaliation. And people like that, people who believe in inheritance more than integrity, don't just back down when you show them boundaries. They test them. I knew the next test was coming. I just didn't know when, or how ugly it would get. A week passed before my phone rang again. The screen lit up with my father's name, just his name, no emojis, no warmth. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. Then it rang again. I answered. His voice came through measured and cold, the way people sound when they've already decided they're right. "We need to talk about this document your lawyer sent," he said. No greeting, no small talk. "Your mother's upset. You made it sound like we're trying to steal from you." "I didn't make it sound like anything," I said carefully. "It's a formal notice, just clarifying ownership." "Ownership," he repeated, the word dripping like something sour. "You wouldn't even have that house if your mother and I hadn't co-signed your first car loan. You think success happens in a vacuum." There it was, the emotional currency they'd always traded in. Guilt disguised as generosity. "I've paid for the house on my own," I said softly. "You know that." He sighed loudly, like the martyr he loved to be. "You've let your pride turn you against your family. Your brother, been nothing but kind to you. He's struggling, and we're simply asking you to consider fairness." "Fairness," I said, my voice trembling despite myself. "I was kicked out when I was 23, remember? I slept in my car for 2 weeks while you changed the locks. You said I was an embarrassment to the family." He went silent for a beat. Then, in the same calm tone, "That was a misunderstanding. We did what we thought was best. You were being difficult, and your mother, well, she couldn't handle your attitude back then." "Right," I whispered. "My attitude, the one that told me I didn't owe anyone blind obedience." He ignored that. "Your mother wants us all to meet. Sunday dinner. Bring the paperwork if you want, but let's talk this through like adults. No lawyers, no threats." I wanted to say no. I should asterisk have said no, but something about his tone, it wasn't angry, it was controlled, made me curious. They weren't done playing. They wanted a stage. "Fine," I said finally. "Sunday." When Sunday came, I drove to the house I grew up in, a place that still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and control. My brother's car was already in the driveway. He stood by the porch with a smug half-smile that told me everything I needed to know. "Guess you've been busy," he said. "Lawyers, documents, all that. You think this is some courtroom drama." I walked past him. You can think what you want." Inside, my mother greeted me with a tight hug that felt like a negotiation. The dining table was already set, candles lit, roast chicken in the center. It looked like a family scene from a magazine, except the air was thick with something unsaid. Dinner started with small talk about the weather, about my job, about my brother's plans. Then, inevitably, it shifted. My father cleared his throat. "Your brother been under a lot of stress. He's found a place he wants to buy, but it's just slightly out of reach financially. We were thinking, since you've been fortunate, maybe you could put the house in both your names, just to balance things a bit." My fork clinked against the plate. "You're asking me to give him half of my house." "No," my mother said quickly. "Not half, just add his name so he has stability." "It's symbolic." "Symbolic," I repeated. "You want me to legally tie my property to someone else for symbolism." My brother leaned forward, his tone sharp. "You always make everything sound so dramatic. It's family, not a business deal." I met his eyes. "Then why does it feel like one?" The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother tried to smooth it over with her practiced calm. "We just don't want bad blood. Family is forever. Houses come and go." "That's funny," I said quietly, "because when I needed family, the house came first." The mask slipped for just a second. My brother rolled his eyes. My father's hand twitched against the tablecloth. I took a deep breath, pulled out a folded sheet of paper from my bag and placed it on the table. The official seal caught the candlelight. "This," I said, tapping the document, "isn't about emotion. It's legal fact. My name, my payments, my home, it's not up for negotiation." My brother scoffed. "Wow, you really think that paper means something?" "It does," I said evenly. "And it's filed with the county, so even if you tear it up, it'll still exist." My father exhaled sharply through his nose, the way he always did when he realized a game wasn't going his way. My mother looked down, twisting her napkin. "I didn't come here to fight," I said, standing up. "I came here to tell you that I won't be manipulated anymore. You can call it pride, coldness, whatever helps you sleep, but this is the line." As I turned to leave, my brother muttered under his breath, "You'll regret this." I paused at the doorway and looked back. I used to regret everything I did to please you. This time, I'll risk regretting peace. Then I walked out, my heels steady against the hardwood floor that had once echoed with my teenage footsteps. The night air felt like freedom and warning at the same time. It started subtly at first, an odd glance from a neighbor, a pause in conversation at the local market. The kind of quiet shift you can't quite name until it becomes a pattern. Then the messages started trickling in. "Hey, are you okay?" One read from an old family friend. "I heard there's trouble with your house." Another, "Your mom mentioned something about you being in debt. Is everything all right?" I read them twice, my stomach tightening. Debt, trouble with my house, that wasn't confusion, it was strategy. My family had moved from guilt to slander, from private control to public humiliation. They couldn't touch the deed, so they decided to attack my name. That evening, I scrolled through social media, heart pounding. Sure enough, there it was, a vague, passive-aggressive post from my brother. "It's sad when greed destroys family. Some people forget who fed them, who built their future, but karma doesn't." The comments were filled with sympathy, mostly from people who didn't know the story but wanted to pick sides anyway. My mother had liked the post. My father had commented with a single praying hands emoji. I sat there, shaking not from rage, but from disbelief. After everything, they were rewriting the story again, making me the villain in their fable about ungrateful children. The next morning, I went straight to Ms. Ramirez's office again, the folder clutched tighter than ever. She looked up from her computer, reading my expression before I said a word. "They've started smearing me," I said, dropping into the chair. "Online, in the neighborhood, saying I stole from them, that I'm mentally unstable. It's like they're trying to destroy my reputation before I can even defend myself." She listened quietly, jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. "That's a classic escalation," she said. "When people lose power privately, they go public. They want to shame you into compliance." "I don't want to stoop to their level," I said. But I also don't want people believing lies. She leaned forward. Then we counter with fact, not noise. I'll draft a cease and desist, simple, direct, no emotion. It'll remind them that defamation has consequences. I watched her type it up. This letter serves as formal notice that any false or defamatory statements made about names, property ownership, mental health, or financial standing constitute actionable misconduct. Every line was measured, professional, and calm, the opposite of the chaos my family was creating. She handed me a copy to sign. We'll send this to each of them individually, your parents, your brother. No posting it online, no public defense. You stay silent and dignified. Let the paper do the talking. I nodded slowly. It felt unnatural to stay quiet when lies were spreading like wildfire, but I understood. Silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. 2 days later, the letters were delivered. That same afternoon, my brother called me. I didn't answer, so he left a voicemail dripping with fury. You think you can threaten your own family with lawyers? You're sick. You've changed. Everyone sees it now. I replayed that message 3 times, not because I needed to hear his words, but because the tone said more than anything. He wasn't confident anymore. He was scared. That night, I sat by my kitchen window, listening to the rain. For years, they'd controlled the story of who I was, the black sheep, the difficult one, the disappointment. But now I was writing my own narrative through receipts, not apologies. I added the C&D letter to my growing folder, Proof 06 Cease and Desist, PDF. Then I opened a fresh document titled Timeline, Events and Actions. I logged every detail, the social post, the messages, the delivery confirmation from Ms. Ramirez's office. It wasn't just defense anymore. It was evidence of a pattern. 2 days later, I got an email from Ms. Ramirez. They've received the letters. Expect noise, but no real action. Keep your head down for now. She was right. The social posts vanished. The whispers died out. My brother deleted his rant. But in that quiet, I knew something else was brewing. My parents weren't the type to retreat. They were the type to regroup. And sure enough, the silence broke a week later with an envelope slid under my door. It wasn't a letter this time. It was a notice of intent to claim shared family property, not from my brother directly, but from his new attorney. They'd gone from emotional manipulation to legal provocation, and that meant the fight was officially public. The envelope lay on my doorstep like a threat disguised in formality. Heavy cream paper, crisp black lettering, notice of intent to claim shared family property. My hands shook as I picked it up. It wasn't the surprise that unsettled me, it was the audacity. They were really doing it. They were taking the one thing that wasn't theirs and trying to drag me through court to get it. Inside, I found 4 neatly typed pages. My brother's name was listed first, then my parents as interested parties. The claim alleged that the house had been jointly financed through family contributions and that I had unjustly withheld shared property. Every line was crafted to sound polite, professional, and deeply false. At the bottom, in bold letters, respond within 10 business days or risk forfeiture through arbitration. I sat down at my kitchen table, surrounded by proof, folders, statements, emails, receipts, all the evidence of what I'd built alone. I had expected their anger, but not this escalation. They weren't just trying to take my home now, they were trying to erase my independence from the public record. I called Ms. Ramirez immediately. She answered on the first ring, her tone calm but alert. "Bring it in," she said. "We'll handle this carefully." By afternoon, I was sitting across from her again, the documents spread between us. She scanned each page with the same surgical focus I'd come to rely on. "This is bluff work," she said finally. "They're hoping you'll panic and settle. There's no evidence attached, no affidavit, just vague references to contributions. It's pressure, not proof." "So what do we do?" "We respond, formally, publicly, and with precision." Her plan was clear. We'd file a rebuttal to their intent notice, attaching every proof of sole ownership, payment history, and legal correspondence we had. It would be sent not just to their attorney, but filed officially with the county office, making it part of the public record. No more whispers, no more family stories, just facts, visible to anyone who cared to look. Over the next few days, I helped her compile everything. The first loan approval under my name, the down payment transfer from my personal account, property tax receipts, even the email thread from years ago when I told my parents I'd purchased the home. It was like rebuilding my own truth in chronological order. At night, though, the silence pressed heavy. I kept wondering how they could justify this, how people could twist love into possession so completely. Every message from my brother echoed in my mind. You'll regret this. Family comes first. No, I thought, family doesn't come first. Integrity does. By the end of the week, Ms. Ramirez had the rebuttal letter drafted. Our client name is the sole owner of the property located at address, having acquired it without joint contribution or promise thereof. Any further claims to the contrary will be considered harassment and addressed through legal recourse. We attached a timeline of payments, the bank statements, and a certified copy of the deed. She signed it, sealed it, and sent it via registered mail to their attorney. Then she handed me an identical copy, embossed and stamped for my own records. This, she said, tapping the cover sheet, is how we draw a line. They wanted a public fight. Now they have one, but on your terms. The next day, I woke to find a message from my cousin, who worked at the courthouse. Your brother showed up this morning with your parents. Looked like they weren't expecting your filing. For the first time in months, I smiled. It wasn't joy exactly, it was something steadier. Relief mixed with vindication. They had walked in expecting silence. Instead, they were met with a wall of documented truth. Later that evening, I took a slow walk around my property. The porch light glowed softly. My garden was overgrown but alive. Everything about the house felt different now, not just a home, but a declaration. Every brick said, I earned this. But I also knew the story wasn't over. My parents didn't back down easily. Their pride was a storm that refused to pass quietly. And if they couldn't win through paperwork, they'd find another way, a spectacle, something meant to shame me in front of others. They always needed an audience, and the next act, I suspected, would have one. The invitation came folded inside a cream-colored envelope, hand-delivered by my aunt, one of those relatives who always managed to sound neutral while carrying bad news. Your mother wanted you to have this, she said, her tone careful, eyes avoiding mine. It was for a family appreciation dinner. The irony stung. A celebration of togetherness, healing, and legacy, to be held at the very same community center where my parents hosted every birthday, anniversary, and holiday gathering. My mother's handwriting was elegant and deliberate, like every word had been chosen for show. At the bottom, she'd written a note in cursive. We want to clear the air. Please come with an open heart. I could already sense what it was, a performance disguised as reconciliation. They'd tried guilt. They tried rumors. They'd tried legal bluffing. Now they wanted a stage, one big enough for the neighborhood to watch me be shamed back into submission. I brought the invitation to Ms. Ramirez. She read it once, then gave a short, knowing nod. They want a public reaction, she said. You have two options, refuse and let them shape the narrative or attend and own the moment. I swallowed. If I go, it's not going to be pretty. Then make it quietly devastating, she said. Stay composed, bring your proof, speak only if necessary. Her words followed me all week, quietly devastating. The night of the dinner, I arrived late on purpose. The parking lot was full, laughter spilling from the open doors. Through the glass, I saw long tables dressed in white linen, soft lights, and the curated perfection my mother always loved. My brother stood near the podium, laughing too loudly, basking in the glow of sympathy. My parents hovered nearby, polished and rehearsed. When I walked in, the room fell into a hush that only polite people know, quiet enough to hide tension, loud enough to amplify it. My mother's smile tightened. You came, she said, relief laced with calculation. I wasn't sure you would. I didn't want to disappoint the audience, I said, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Dinner began with speeches about family bonds and learning from mistakes. My father spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Families are complicated," he began, "and sometimes misunderstandings happen. But we must remember that family property belongs to legacy, not ego." There it was, the script, polished, moral-sounding, and poisonous. My brother took over next, pretending humility. "I never wanted conflict," he said, looking straight at me. "I just wanted fairness. It breaks my heart that legal threats have replaced love." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others avoided eye contact. I felt my pulse thudding in my neck. They were winning the room, painting me as the cold, ungrateful daughter who turned on her own blood. When they finished, my mother gestured toward me. "Would you like to say a few words?" she asked sweetly, her tone daring me to make a scene. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I stood. The scrape of my chair against the floor was the loudest sound in the room. "I appreciate everyone coming together tonight," I began, my voice steady. "And I agree, families should value truth, so in that spirit." I reached into my bag and pulled out a small stack of papers, the rebuttal filing, stamped with the county seal. "This is the official record of my home ownership," I said, holding it up. "Filed and verified. There's been talk of shared property and family legacy. I just wanted everyone to know that legally, there's no confusion." A gasp cut through the room. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My brother's jaw tightened. "I don't say this to embarrass anyone," I continued, keeping my voice calm, measured. "I say it because silence has allowed too many lies to grow. I'm not angry. I'm done." Someone near the back whispered, "Good for her." It was small, but it was enough. I placed the documents on the table beside the microphone and turned to leave. My father called after me. "This isn't how decent people handle family matters." I stopped at the doorway, looked back once and said, "Decency isn't silence when you're being stolen from." Then I walked out, the murmurs swelling behind me, half shock, half respect. The night air hit like a wave of release. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just breathed. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window. My phone buzzed nonstop, messages from relatives, some scolding, some supportive. But one stood out, a text from my aunt who had handed me that invitation. "They're quiet now. You handled it better than they ever could. You made truth look graceful." For the first time in years, I felt weightless. The public reckoning they'd planned to humiliate me had turned into their undoing. No shouting, no tears, just quiet exposure. Proof had done what anger never could. The morning after the dinner, the silence was deafening. For the first time in months, there were no phone calls, no messages, no veiled threats. It was as if the entire family had collectively swallowed their words. The social media posts vanished overnight, replaced by curated family photos and quotes about forgiveness. The quiet, though, didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the calm after a wildfire. By noon, I received an email from Ms. Ramirez with the subject line, "Fallout, immediate notes." She'd already heard from the opposing attorney. "Their claim has been informally withdrawn," she wrote, her tone clinical even through text. "They're embarrassed. I recommend no further contact unless necessary." I stared at the words for a long time, letting them sink in. Withdrawn. After months of psychological warfare, lies, and manipulation, it was over, not because they admitted fault, but because they couldn't keep pretending once the truth became public record. Later that day, my aunt stopped by again. She looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot on my porch. "Your parents are upset," she said softly. "Your mother feels humiliated. Your brother's angry that you made him look foolish. But," she paused, "people are also talking about how calm you were, how you didn't raise your voice once. You made them look small without even trying." I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to prove. For years, I had been the one they called stubborn, dramatic, ungrateful. Now the story had turned itself inside out, and all I had done was tell the truth, with paperwork. That evening, I sat outside under the fading light, my house quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the distant sound of traffic. The garden smelled of earth and rain. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could just sit in my home without feeling like I had to defend it. Still, peace had a strange weight. Winning didn't erase the ache that came from realizing just how little family sometimes means when money and pride are involved. My parents hadn't called to apologize. My brother hadn't texted, and part of me knew they never would. I spent the next few days closing loops. Ms. Ramirez helped me file a final record, a notice of closure that documented the withdrawal of my family's claim. She advised me to secure a secondary deed protection order, just to ensure no future disputes could reopen. I did it without hesitation. The clerk stamped the paper with a dull thud, and that sound felt like punctuation at the end of a long, ugly sentence. On Friday, I got a call from the local real estate registry. "Just confirming that your property claim is now fully uncontested," the clerk said. "No active challenges, it's all clean." I thanked her, hung up, and sat there for a long time in silence, staring at the sunlight pouring across my floorboards. I thought about the version of myself that had once tiptoed around everyone else's moods, the version who apologized just to keep peace that wasn't real. She was gone now, replaced by someone quieter, yes, but also unbreakable. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I invited a few friends over. Just 3 of them, people who had stuck by me through the chaos. We sat in my backyard with simple food, nothing fancy, grilled vegetables, iced tea, soft music. The air was light, filled with laughter that didn't carry tension. Claire raised her glass and said, "To receipts, resilience, and real boundaries." I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. "To peace," I added. Later, after everyone left, I stood at the edge of the yard, looking at my house bathed in warm light. Every window glowed with a kind of quiet ownership, not of property, but of self. I realized that justice doesn't always look like revenge or applause. Sometimes it's just the absence of fear. I checked my phone one last time before bed. A single unread message blinked on the screen from my mother. No long text, no apology, just, "I hope you're happy now." I stared at it, then typed back slowly, "I am." Then I turned off my phone, set it face down, and went to bed. The following weeks felt like the quiet after a long storm, not empty, but clear. Every sound, every small moment had meaning again. The sunlight through the curtains no longer reminded me of a house I might lose. It was mine, fully, in both paper and spirit. Yet I didn't want to just sit in victory. I wanted this fight, this exhausting, humbling journey, to mean something beyond my front door. One morning, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold, staring at the folder that had once held all my receipts. Bank statements, lawyer letters, property records. Each page carried a story of fear and endurance. What if someone else was going through the same thing right now, alone and terrified, with no one to tell them that it's okay to fight quietly? The thought stuck to me like a calling. I reached out to Ms. Ramirez again. "I want to do something with this," I told her over the phone. "Something constructive, maybe a resource for people who don't understand their rights, especially when family is the one crossing lines." She paused for a moment. "That's a beautiful idea," she said softly. "You've already lived the hardest part. Turning that pain into structure, that's healing work." Within a week, I'd registered a small nonprofit initiative, the Foundation for Fair Boundaries. The name came from one of Ms. Ramirez's earliest lessons. Boundaries are how love stays healthy. The foundation's purpose was simple: to offer free workshops on personal property rights, inheritance laws, and emotional literacy around family manipulation. Not revenge, not exposure, education. The first workshop was held in a small community center downtown. 15 people showed up, a mix of young adults, single parents, and a few older folks with folders of their own. As I stood there, I felt the same nervousness I had felt at the dinner confrontation weeks before. Only this time, it wasn't fear of loss, it was the weight of responsibility. "I'm not a lawyer," I began, "but I learned the hard way that silence doesn't protect you. Documentation does." The room was quiet. I held up a folder that looked just like the one that had saved my sanity. "This is what empowerment looks like, even if it starts with shaking hands and sleepless nights." A man in the back raised his hand. "So, you forgave them?" he asked softly. I thought about that for a moment. "Forgiveness isn't a door you open for them," I said. It's a window you open for yourself to let in light again. You just make sure it's a window that locks." The room chuckled, and I smiled too. After the session, a young woman stayed behind to talk. She was trembling, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom keeps using my name on her credit cards," she said. "I didn't know I could stop her legally." I looked her in the eyes. "You can," I said, "and you will. Let's start with the first step, get your paperwork together." When she smiled, I saw a piece of myself in her, that lost, confused version of me who thought love meant enduring harm. Helping her didn't erase what had happened to me, but it transformed it. It turned survival into something active, something good. By the end of the month, we had 3 more workshops scheduled and a partnership with a local legal aid group. The city council even sent a short letter of recognition, formal and impersonal, but meaningful. I framed it in my living room, right beside the deed to my house. 2 pieces of paper that represented 2 victories, one for me and one for others. That evening, I sat on my porch again, watching the sky shift from gold to violet. The air was still, the cicadas humming. It struck me how far I'd come from being thrown out of a house to building one, not of bricks and wood, but of advocacy and truth. There was still a hollow ache when I thought of my family. Maybe there always would be, but it no longer defined me. I had found a new kind of family, one built on shared pain, shared growth, and shared strength. I picked up my phone and opened the Foundation's page. Messages were already pouring in, stories from people across the country who saw themselves in mine. Some angry, some grieving, but all searching for the same thing I had: fairness without fury. I replied to a few before setting the phone down. "We'll help each other," I whispered to no one in particular. "We'll make it right, one page at a time." It's strange how peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It just settles, like soft dust over old wounds or quiet sunlight over a place once burned. Weeks had passed since the last confrontation, yet each morning still carried the faint echo of what used to be anxiety, habit, readiness for battle. It took time to understand that I didn't have to flinch anymore. One morning, I walked through the house barefoot, my coffee warm in my hands. The floor creaked under my steps, a sound that once made me anxious, as if someone might barge in and remind me I didn't belong here. But now, that sound meant something else: belonging. I had earned this peace, documented it, defended it, and now I was finally allowed to live in it. I sat at my desk and looked at the deed framed on the wall. Below it, I'd added another frame, a small, simple certificate of incorporation for the Foundation for Fair Boundaries. It still made me smile to see those words together. Fair, boundaries. 2 things I once thought were opposites but had learned were deeply connected. That day, a letter arrived. A physical one, handwritten in my mother's delicate cursive. For a long time, I just stared at the envelope, my name written so carefully as if she had rehearsed it. When I finally opened it, the paper smelled faintly of lavender, her perfume. "I don't know what to say," the letter began. "Your father is angry, your brother feels betrayed. But I've been thinking about what you said that night. About fairness, about earning what we have. Maybe we didn't teach you that as well as we thought." Her words faltered after that. The rest of the letter was full of small apologies that weren't quite admissions, and stories about her garden, her health, the weather. But near the end, there was one line that made me pause. "I see now that you didn't take anything from us. You just refused to give up what was already yours." I read that sentence over and over until the words blurred. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement, and that was something I'd never expected. That night, I sat outside on the porch again, the cool wind brushing past my face. I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance, healthy, respectful distance. I whispered into the dark, "I hope you find your peace too." The Foundation kept growing. We launched a small scholarship fund for single parents studying law, named it the house I kept. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every donation, every thank you letter, felt like a brick being laid in something that would stand long after my personal storm had passed. At the scholarship's launch event, I gave a short speech. The room was filled with people who had stories like mine, quiet wars fought behind closed doors. "Justice doesn't always roar," I said. "Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it looks like paperwork or silence or simply saying no." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was steady, meaningful. As the evening ended, I realized something important. Closure isn't a moment. It's a series of choices, one small truth at a time. My family might never understand my boundaries, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I understood them. Driving home, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the confrontation, the humiliation, all of it had led here, to something rooted in integrity. The house glowed faintly in the dark as I pulled into the driveway, light spilling from the windows like quiet proof that I had built more than walls. I had built peace. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before turning off the light. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was the real ending, not dramatic, not cinematic, but profoundly human. Justice had found its still point, and it had come dressed as understanding. In the quiet that followed the letter, something inside me began to settle into wisdom. I realized I had spent so many years fighting for fairness, I had forgotten what it meant to live for peace. Now, for the first time, I could think beyond defense, beyond survival. It was time to turn lessons into something I could give away freely, like air. I started collecting thoughts, moments, and insights from my journey, not the painful parts, but the practical ones. Late nights with Ms. Ramirez explaining clauses and contracts. The first time I dared to say no without apology. The moment I realized that silence could be strategy, not weakness. I began writing them down, one by one, until my notes became something like a guide. Not a legal document, a life one. I called it the Boundaries Handbook, quiet tools for loud problems. It wasn't for profit. I published it online through the Foundation's site and made it free for anyone to download. Within weeks, hundreds of people had accessed it. Some sent messages saying it helped them have hard conversations with their families. Others said it gave them courage to finally see a lawyer or to walk away from manipulation they had mistaken for love. I added a short disclaimer at the beginning, the same one that had protected me all along. Inspired by true events, names and details changed. Even then, people read between the lines. They recognized themselves. And that, more than anything, felt like purpose. One afternoon, I got a message from a woman named Elise. She said her father had left her out of the family business after years of promising otherwise, and she didn't know how to fight back. "They said I was ungrateful for even asking," she wrote. "Your story made me realize I'm not asking for too much. I'm asking for what's mine." Reading her words, I felt tears sting my eyes. There it was, the reason for all of it. Every sleepless night, every document, every confrontation at that dinner table, it had led to this one woman finding her strength. Maybe that was what justice was supposed to do, ripple outward quietly. I began hosting monthly virtual sessions through the Foundation, calling them boundary circles. People would log in from all over, faces framed by dim living rooms, kitchen tables, parked cars. Some spoke, some just listened. We discussed not just legal tools but emotional ones, how to separate duty from guilt, kindness from compliance, love from ownership. At the end of every session, I would say, "Remember, fairness doesn't mean everyone gets what they want. It means everyone carries what they owe." And every time, someone would nod, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling. That line became our unofficial motto. We printed it on small cards, handed them out at workshops, even had them posted on the Foundation's bulletin board. I'd see people stop, read it, and whisper it under their breath like a small prayer. Meanwhile, I'd started journaling again, something I hadn't done since before my family turned my life upside down. But now my entries were lighter. They were about mornings spent watering the garden, or the first donation that came in from someone I'd never met, or the satisfaction of seeing others find their voices. In one entry I wrote, "Justice isn't about winning. It's about reclaiming the space where your peace was stolen." And I realized that's exactly what I had done. My house was more than property now. It was a sanctuary of lessons learned, boundaries honored, and truth documented. It was proof that dignity doesn't shout, it simply stands its ground. On a quiet evening, I took one last look through my folder of documents, the same one that once symbolized fear. I removed the final copy of the legal withdrawal letter and placed it in a sealed envelope labeled archive. Then I tucked it into a drawer and exhaled. I no longer needed it for protection. The real receipts were written in my actions now. I poured a glass of wine, went out to the porch and looked at the stars. The wind was gentle, the air calm. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing guard. I felt like I was home. Over time, the story that once kept me awake at night began to feel like something that belonged to another version of me, a version that needed proof to believe in her own worth. Now, I had moved beyond that need. My receipts had done their job. My truth had been documented, validated, sealed, and filed. What remained was something quieter, deeper, the responsibility to protect that peace and to help others learn how to protect theirs. I began recording short reflections for the Foundation's online platform, not motivational speeches, just calm, steady conversations about boundaries and self-respect. I filmed them from my living room, sitting near the same window that once framed my fear. The first video opened simply. Sometimes, justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's the sound of you saying no and meaning it. Within days, people began to share the clips. Comments flooded in, not dramatic, not performative, but grateful. Some said my calm tone helped them breathe after arguments with family. Others said they'd finally gathered their own paperwork, inspired by how I'd done it. It was strange to see that what once felt like isolation had turned into connection. At one point, a journalist from a local magazine reached out. She wanted to write a piece about quiet legal empowerment, her words, not mine, and asked to interview me about the Foundation. I hesitated at first, worried that going public again might reopen old wounds. But Ms. Ramirez, ever my voice of reason, smiled when I told her. "You're not defending yourself anymore," she said. "You're defining what peace looks like. There's a difference." The article was published a few weeks later. The headline read, "The woman who won her house and built a movement of boundaries." I laughed at that. It sounded so much grander than it felt. But when I read through the article, I saw that it captured something true. That empowerment isn't about revenge, it's about stability. I kept one printed copy of the article and tucked it into my folder, the same place that used to hold evidence. This, too, was proof. Proof that the story had changed shape, that my pain had matured into purpose. A few days after the article went live, I received a message from someone unexpected, my father. Just 2 sentences. "I read the article. I'm proud of what you built. We didn't see it before. Maybe we couldn't." I stared at those words for a long time. There was no apology, no undoing of the past, but there was recognition. For a man who believed silence was strength, those 2 lines were an earthquake. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Some acknowledgments live better in quiet. That evening, I walked through the house, touching the walls, the door frames, the windows. The same house they once tried to take was now a living record of grace under fire. Each corner held a piece of my evolution, the nights I cried, the mornings I rebuilt, the moments I chose to stay calm when anger would have been easier. I paused by the living room window and looked out. Across the street, a family was laughing, kids running barefoot on the grass. It made me smile, not with envy, but with a kind of soft acceptance. Families are complicated. Love is complicated. But fairness is clear. The next Foundation event was scheduled for that weekend, a community dinner titled Grace, Boundaries, and Belonging. It wasn't a formal gala or a fundraiser, just a simple gathering of people who had learned to draw lines with love. We shared food, stories, quiet laughter. No drama, no legal papers this time, just connection. Near the end of the night, someone asked if I still spoke to my family. I smiled, took a deep breath, and said, "Sometimes. Enough." The table fell silent, then nodded, understanding that peace doesn't always look like closeness. Sometimes it looks like distance that no longer hurts. After everyone left, I cleaned up slowly, putting away dishes and folding napkins. The house hummed softly, filled with the faint smell of food and candles. I realized then that this normal, gentle moment was what victory truly looked like. Not a court order, not a speech, not an article, just peace that stayed. I used to think that justice was something you had to demand, loud, forceful, undeniable. But standing here now, years after it all began, I've learned that the most powerful justice is often invisible. It happens in your posture, your choices, your peace. It happens when you no longer need to explain your worth to anyone, even the people who once made you doubt it. After the dinner, the letter, and my father's quiet message, the house became more than a symbol. It became a classroom. Every wall held a reminder of something I had learned: patience, preparation, restraint, dignity. Sometimes when I walked through the hallway, I'd touch the framed deeds and articles, not out of pride, but gratitude. They weren't trophies. They were milestones of survival turned wisdom. One morning, I woke up before sunrise, the house still and dim. I brewed coffee and went out to the porch, watching the sky blush pink over the rooftops. There was a calm in me that used to scare me, the kind of stillness that only comes after you've made peace with what can't be fixed. I realized I didn't need my family's apology anymore. Their understanding had arrived too late to change the past, but right on time to confirm something I already knew. I was right to protect myself. That same week, we hosted a new workshop at the foundation, titled "Documentation is Dignity." The name came from something Ms. Ramirez once said when I doubted my right to fight back. "You're not making noise," she told me. "You're making a record." The turnout surprised me. The room was full, standing room only. We had teachers, small business owners, young adults, even an elderly woman who brought her granddaughter. I stood at the front, holding my folder, the same one that had saved me, and opened with the truth that had carried me through everything. This folder used to represent fear. Now it represents freedom. The audience listened closely as I walked them through how to document abuse, betrayal, or financial manipulation without losing their composure. I shared practical steps, dates, copies, receipts, but also the emotional steps: when to walk away, how to set a tone of respect even in chaos. People took notes like their lives depended on it. Maybe in some way they did. Afterward, a man approached me with tears in his eyes. "My sister's going through something similar," he said. "She doesn't have your calm, though. She gets angry." I smiled gently. "Anger's not wrong," I said. "It's just not the finish line." He nodded, and I saw something shift in his expression, a quiet understanding of strength that doesn't shout. That night, when I came home, I opened my journal again and wrote, "Justice without humility becomes pride. Humility without justice becomes submission. Real peace lives between the two." It felt like the final lesson I needed to learn. I decided then that it was time to start stepping back, not away from the foundation, but from the fight itself. I had built enough systems, enough people, enough structure for it to thrive without me at the center. I didn't want to live defined by the worst thing that had happened to me, even if I'd transformed it into something good. So I began mentoring quietly, one-on-one, helping others find their calm before their storms. I taught them to breathe before replying to hostile messages, to write down facts before reacting to insults, to keep everything, even anger, in writing. Because paper doesn't lie. Ms. Ramirez often teased me that I had become more of a counselor than a client. "That's the circle of justice," she'd say. "We fight to learn, we learn to teach, and then we rest." Rest, that word carried a weight it never had before. It didn't mean giving up. It meant knowing I'd done enough. That evening, as I sat by the window with the soft hum of the city outside, I realized the house didn't just belong to me legally. It belonged to me spiritually. Every moment of chaos, every insult, every sleepless night had earned me this quiet. The garden had grown too. The trees were fuller now, the grass richer. It was as if the land itself had relaxed, mirroring me. I walked out barefoot, feeling the soil cool beneath my feet, and whispered, "We're safe now." For once, I wasn't speaking to the house or the ghosts of my past. I was speaking to myself. There's something about the way silence fills a room after years of noise. It's not empty, it's earned. I remember sitting in my office at the foundation one quiet afternoon, looking at a new draft of our resource guide. The title read, "Boundaries, Receipts, and Renewal." It made me smile because it felt like a mirror, the 3 stages of my own journey. For weeks, I'd been collecting notes for this final guide, a kind of roadmap for anyone walking through betrayal, legal threats, or family manipulation. Not legal advice exactly, but survival architecture. The kind that's built from scars, not textbooks. Each page had a story, a lesson, a reflection, small pieces of wisdom I wished I'd had when everything first began. I started the guide with a simple truth. You can't control who breaks your heart, but you can control how you document the damage. From there, I wrote about the practical tools that saved me, copies of old letters, organized emails, bank statements, timelines. But I also wrote about the invisible tools, breathing before reacting, listening for manipulation disguised as care, and understanding that calm is a strategy, not a weakness. As I wrote, I found myself revisiting the moments I'd tried so hard to move past, the eviction, the betrayal, the courtroom stares. For the first time, those memories didn't sting. They felt like case studies. I could finally look at them without flinching, as if I were reviewing someone else's file. That detachment wasn't cold, it was closure. One of my favorite sections of the guide was titled, "When Family Becomes a Case." It was about the moment you realize love doesn't excuse harm, and loyalty doesn't require silence. I remembered my mother's face when I first stood up for myself, the disbelief, the wounded pride. Back then, I thought her anger meant I was wrong. Now I understood it simply meant she was unprepared to face accountability. Still, I didn't want my guide to harden anyone. I wanted it to balance truth with grace. So I ended that section with this line. Forgiveness is optional, dignity is not. When the draft was done, I printed a copy and handed it to Ms. Ramirez. She read through it slowly, tapping her pen against her notepad, her expression soft but serious. "This isn't just a guide," she said. "It's a legacy." Her words sat with me for days. A legacy. That's not something I ever thought I'd build from a broken beginning. But maybe that's what legacy really is, not what you leave behind when you die, but what you stand for while you're still here. Later that week, we filmed a short educational video to go with the guide. I spoke directly to the camera, no makeup, no set, just natural light through the window. My voice was steady. If you're watching this, you've probably been dismissed, manipulated, or told that peace comes from pretending nothing happened. I'm here to tell you documentation is not vengeance. It's self-respect. When the video ended, I looked into the lens for a moment longer than I should have. I wanted the viewer, whoever they were, to feel my calm, to know it was possible to reach this point. We uploaded the video, attached the guide, and within days, the Foundation's inbox overflowed. People from all over the country wrote messages like, "I started my folder. I finally left. I filed my case." Others simply said, "Thank you for giving calm a voice." It was humbling, overwhelming, grounding all at once. The same words that once defended me were now defending others. That night, I closed the Foundation's office and walked home under a dusky sky. The city lights shimmered faintly against the horizon, and for a moment, I thought of my younger self, the one packing her things in a panic, the one who thought she had no place left to belong. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her, one day, this pain will fund peace. When I got home, I opened my folder. Yes, I still kept it. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me how far I'd come. I added one more page at the end, a printed copy of the guide's cover. Then I closed it and placed it on the top shelf, like a book I had finished reading. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I decided to visit my old neighborhood. I hadn't been back since the lawsuit ended, not because I was afraid, but because peace had made me selective about where I spent my energy. Still, something in me wanted to see it again, not as the girl they threw out, but as the woman who stood her ground. I parked a few houses down from the old place. The maple tree in front had grown taller, the branches bending slightly over the roof. I remembered sitting under that tree as a kid, writing in my little pink diary about dreams of traveling, owning a home, being loved without conditions. I smiled at the memory. She had no idea what was coming, that girl, but she also had no idea how strong she'd be. The house itself looked the same, but the feeling around it was different. It no longer had the weight of loss. It just stood there, a structure made of bricks and decisions. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was grateful, because without being pushed out of it, I never would have built something truly mine. As I sat in my car, I pulled out a small notebook I'd started carrying. It wasn't for documentation anymore, it was for reflection. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, "Closure doesn't come from watching them regret it. It comes from no longer needing them to." It was strange how true that felt. My family hadn't changed. They still didn't reach out, didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge what happened. But their silence no longer dictated my worth. That was the gift of boundaries. They made other people's noise irrelevant. I drove from there to the community garden near my current home, the one the foundation helped rebuild after a local flood. It had become my favorite place. Rows of herbs and flowers, benches shaded by vines, laughter from children running around with watering cans. It was ordinary, peaceful, and alive. One of the volunteers, a teenage girl named Asha, waved at me as I walked in. "We saved you a spot," she said, pointing to a corner where small pots of lavender waited. I knelt down and began planting, feeling the dirt between my fingers. There was something grounding about it, the cycle of breaking soil to make way for life. Around me, I could hear snippets of laughter, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic. It all felt like music. As I pressed the last seedling into place, Asha asked quietly, "Do you ever wish things were different? You know that your family had treated you better." I paused for a long moment, then looked up at her. "I used to," I said, "but now I think if they had, I might never have learned how to treat myself better. Sometimes life teaches you through loss what love couldn't teach you through comfort." She nodded, thoughtful, and returned to her planting. I stayed a little longer, watching the sunlight move slowly across the garden beds. It struck me then that healing isn't one grand event, it's thousands of small, quiet choices to stay soft when you have every reason to harden. When I finally stood, brushing dirt from my knees, I felt a weight lift from somewhere deep inside me. I had fought battles I never wanted, faced truths I didn't ask for, and somehow I had turned it all into purpose. Before leaving, I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the lavender patch, the one Asha and I had planted. The caption came to me instantly, "Roots only grow when you stop running from the ground." I posted it to the foundation's page with a short note encouraging followers to find one small act of peace that day. As I walked back to my car, I felt that quiet dignity that had carried me through every chapter. It wasn't loud, it wasn't triumphant. It was calm, certain, and completely mine. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a local community forum called Stories of Justice. It wasn't a grand stage, just a modest auditorium in the city center with foldable chairs, warm lighting, and a small audience of maybe 50 people. But something about it felt monumental. This wasn't about reclaiming my voice anymore. It was about lending it. I sat backstage, holding my note cards, though I already knew I wouldn't use them. The hum of quiet conversation drifted from the audience. Somewhere in that murmur, I heard laughter, light, hopeful. It made me smile. The host, a kind woman named Lillian, came over and touched my shoulder gently. "Whenever you're ready," she said. When I stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent in that way that happens when people are ready to listen, not just hear. I began with something simple, my name, my story in one line. My family tried to take my house, and I fought back with documentation instead of destruction. A small wave of recognition passed through the audience. Some nodded, some leaned forward. They understood. I talked about the early days, the confusion, the guilt, the loneliness of standing against people who had once tucked me into bed. But I also talked about the turning point, when I stopped reacting from pain and started responding with evidence. Every screenshot, every letter, every timestamp wasn't just a receipt, I said. It was a piece of my dignity, preserved in ink. Behind me on a screen, images appeared. Snippets of documents, blurred for privacy, the legal letters, the foundation's deed, the scholarship announcement. The audience gasped softly, not at the proof itself, but at the pattern it revealed, a life reclaimed through strategy. I told them about Ms. Ramirez and her phrase, "Justice doesn't shout," about Asha in the garden, about the lavender plants that had grown taller since that first day. Then I looked out into the crowd and said, "Justice doesn't always end in a courtroom. Sometimes it ends in peace you no longer have to defend." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slow and deliberate, they began to clap. Not the thunderous kind that celebrates spectacle, but the kind that honors truth, steady, respectful, deep. After the event, people lined up to talk to me. An older man with kind eyes said, "Your story made me realize I've been apologizing for wanting fairness." A young mother whispered, "I'm starting my folder tonight." A social worker asked for extra copies of the guide to distribute. In the middle of all that gratitude, I felt something unexpected, not pride, but humility, because I wasn't the hero of this story. I was simply proof that a person can survive betrayal without becoming bitter. When the auditorium emptied, Lillian handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for showing us that quiet strength is still strength." Tucked beside it was a single sprig of dried lavender, pressed flat, wrapped with twine. My throat tightened. That simple gesture felt like the perfect full circle, the girl who once stood in a garden, now standing on a stage, both moments rooted in growth. Later that evening, as I packed my things, I noticed a faint smudge of dirt still under my fingernails from planting earlier that week. I didn't wipe it away. It reminded me that no matter how far I'd come, my strength had always been built from the ground up, one choice, one receipt, one boundary at a time. Driving home under the soft orange glow of city lights, I thought about how life had a way of turning even the cruelest plots into sacred scripts, if you kept your dignity through the rewrite. That night, I set the lavender sprig on my desk beside my old folder. For once, both symbols, pain and peace, could coexist. I didn't need to separate them anymore. They belonged together like cause and effect, like wound and wisdom. That night after the forum, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to the small hill just outside the city, the one with the view of the river and the skyline in the distance. It had always been my thinking place. I parked my car, stepped out into the cool air, and just stood there for a while, listening to the wind move through the grass. The lights from the city shimmered below like a heartbeat, steady, alive. For the first time in years, I felt that same steadiness inside myself. I sat on a wooden bench, the kind that creaks a little when you lean back, and pulled my coat tighter around me. My life had changed in ways I couldn't have imagined, from being kicked out of my home to standing on a stage teaching others how to protect theirs. Yet, even now, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like clarity, like a fog had finally lifted and revealed a simple truth I should have seen all along. Peace was never something my family could give or take. It was something I had to claim, piece by piece, choice by choice. As I stared at the river below, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my younger cousin, Daniel, one of the few family members who had quietly kept in touch through the years. "I saw the video of your talk," he wrote. "I just want you to know I'm proud of you. Things at home aren't the same anymore. You were right. The truth eventually makes everyone uncomfortable, but it also makes them think." I read the message twice, then a third time. My chest tightened not with pain, but with something gentler. Forgiveness, maybe, not for what they did, but for what they didn't know how to do. I typed back. "Tell them I wish them peace, and tell yourself you deserve better than silence." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. Some conversations only exist to close a chapter. The wind picked up, brushing through the trees around me. I took out my small notebook again and flipped to the last page. In bold letters, I wrote, "Justice is not revenge. It's the decision to live unbothered by those who underestimated you." That line felt final, not like an ending, but like a full stop at the end of a sentence that had taken me years to write. As I sat there, I thought back to the woman I was the night I was kicked out, standing in the rain, suitcase in hand, shaking from betrayal. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her, "You don't need to fight to be seen. Just keep your receipts and walk away with grace. One day, your calm will be louder than their chaos." That thought made me smile, and just like that, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even waiting for them to regret anything. The story was over, and I was finally okay with that. I stood, brushed the dust off my coat, and began walking back toward my car. The air smelled faintly of lavender, maybe from the sachet I kept in my pocket, or maybe from memory itself. Either way, it made me feel safe. Before driving home, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. No more fighting for spaces that require me to shrink. I looked one last time at the city lights, reflecting off the river like scattered diamonds. They didn't belong to anyone. They just existed, bright, indifferent, and free. So was I. The morning after that night on the hill, I woke up before sunrise. The world was still, the kind of quiet that feels sacred, not empty, but waiting. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the first light spill across the street. For years, mornings like this had felt heavy, as if I was waking up into another day of defense. But now, the silence felt different. It wasn't something to survive. It was something to savor. I thought about the long road behind me, the betrayal, the courtroom, the foundation, the lavender garden, the forum. Every scene had felt final in its own way, yet here I was, still evolving. Justice hadn't been one grand victory. It had been a series of small, deliberate choices that led me back to myself. The receipts, the letters, the quiet confrontations, they weren't about revenge. They were about reclaiming respect. As the sun rose higher, I opened my laptop and began writing what would become the Foundation's final update for the year. The title, From Proof to Peace. In it, I wrote, "When I first started documenting everything, I thought I was preparing for war. What I didn't know was that I was really building peace, one piece of evidence at a time. Documentation didn't just protect me, it taught me who I was when the noise faded. Calm, capable, and unwilling to shrink." I added a short note at the end, the same way I always did. Names and details have been changed for privacy. It wasn't just a disclaimer anymore. It was a reminder that stories like mine weren't rare. They were simply untold. Before I hit publish, I looked around my home, the walls I'd chosen, the art I'd hung, the lavender scent that lingered in the air. I realized this house wasn't just shelter. It was proof that I had rewritten my own inheritance. Not in the form of deeds or wealth, but in the form of wisdom. I walked outside to the porch with my tea, the same spot where I used to feel haunted by memories. The air was cool, clean. Across the street, I saw a family walking their dog, laughing softly. No envy stirred inside me, no ache for what I didn't have. Just gratitude, deep and unshakable. I took out my notebook one last time and wrote a line that felt like both a prayer and a declaration. May my calm be my loudest comeback. Then, for the first time, I closed the notebook and didn't feel the need to open it again. My story was told, not as a cry for validation, but as a testimony to what happens when you refuse to be erased. That evening, I went to the Foundation's office to lock up for the weekend. On the bulletin board, I noticed a few of the volunteers had posted handwritten notes from visitors. Some said things like, "I filed for my rights today," or "I started over and it's not too late." Others simply said, "Thank you for helping me believe quiet doesn't mean powerless." I stood there for a long time, reading each one. They were written in different hands, different languages, different ink colors, yet all spoke the same truth. Justice wasn't a loud moment in court or a dramatic reckoning at dinner. It was a steady heartbeat in every person who decided that dignity mattered more than approval. I turned off the lights, closed the door behind me, and stepped into the night. The city hummed softly, alive and infinite, for the first time. I didn't feel like part of a battle. I felt like part of a movement. As I walked away, I whispered into the wind, almost to myself. They took my home, but I built something greater, a foundation that can't be taken. And with that, the story came full circle. Not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with something rarer, quieter, stronger. Peace earned through proof and freedom found in self-respect.